Welcome to In Our Own Defense podcast. We're your host, Attorney A.D. Winters, founder and managing attorney of VeteransDefender.com, and Dr. Dolores Tarver, licensed psychologist. For more information about our show, find us on social media at In Our Own Defense on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube channel, and you can email us at inourown.defense@gmail.com. This is part of our four-part series. This is the second part of our four-part series of In Our Own Defense podcast that we have the pleasure of having the extremely talented and dynamic attorney, Mr. Trey Baker. He's the Director of African American Engagement for the Biden-Harris 2020 presidential campaign. And he's going to be here with us discussing empowerment, employment, economics in the 2020 election. In the previous show, we discussed empowerment, empowerment of the LGBTQI community, empowerment for African Americans, empowerment as far as the vote with the Latinx community, empowerment for all peoples and all citizens of America, and what the campaign had in store. In this particular episode, Dr. Tarver, I'd like for us to engage about employment and what employment opportunities this campaign may have in place. What are you seeing, Dr. Tarver, as far as your patients that you're treating as a provider? What are you noticing as it relates to employment issues?
Definitely seeing a lot of unemployment and underemployment in my clients. People are having a very difficult time getting re-employed once they've been employed. People are often told essentially they're being laid off and that they'll be called back, but they're not receiving that call back. In particular, a lot of my African American males are having a hard time getting employment back, especially those that worked in any kind of factory setting or in any kind of food industry. A lot of people in their jobs, if they are in higher level jobs in companies, they're being downsized. And so they're being either told to take a lesser position with less salary and less benefits to stay employed, or to be let go altogether. So people are understandably anxious about this unemployment situation and concerned about what is this going to mean in the next several months and what is going to happen in 2021. I think a lot of people are holding on hope, like, okay, well, if we can just get to 2021. But now people are like, okay, but that's not a magic number. We get there and then what? Especially when we aren't sure who our president is going to be and what kind of policies may be put in place to help with employment.
And I appreciate you for that, Dr. Tarver. I think those are valid concerns. I notice as a small business owner or employed people, that is a extreme challenge that we're working through. Well, without further ado, for this second part, I want to bring on our guest just real quick. Trey Baker is the Director of African American Engagement for the Joe Biden campaign, the Biden-Harris 2020. He's a Mississippian, self-described as a Mississippian Grenadier and Tuvaluan bow tie aficionado. He's got his undergraduate studies he did at Tuvalu College, and he earned his Juris Doctorate from the University of Denver Law. He manages and leads an array of programs and efforts there at the Biden-Harris campaign. But help me welcome him back to the show. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Baker.
Welcome back.
And this second part of our four-part series of In Our Own Defense, we want to discuss employment impacts, and I'll let Dr. Tarver talk about it, the pandemic posture and how this impact is bringing depression about to our people. Go ahead, Dr. Tarver.
Thank you so much, Attorney Winters. Attorney Baker, I know that you are very well aware of what unemployment can do to a family. I know you have seen it, coming up in our small town that we grew up in, when we had some plants closed there, and a lot of people had to change and adjust what they were doing in their families, and often people didn't come back from that. We've seen generations and generations of people still struggling from people being laid off in their families. And so my clients are dealing with a lot of understandable anxiety about what this means for them in terms of unemployment rates, which are skyrocketing, and not having a lot of resources. There's only so much support that they're able to receive, and that is decreasing, and they're unsure of what that may look like. I know that you have talked about Vice President Biden's Build Back Better. And we want to kind of know how does that affect our people? For them who say they are concerned about whether or not they'll be able to get employed again, who are sick and afraid to go back to work, right? If they've had a COVID exposure. And so they're thinking, I don't want to go back to work and then I get sick again. And what if I don't make it this time? For people who don't want to be able to necessarily be on unemployment, but don't feel like they have any other options. And for folks who are trying to navigate their kids at home as well and figure out how they're going to work. We know that we get avoidant when we get fearful, but what are some things that the Biden campaign are outlining in terms of helping people through what I deem as an employment crisis right now?
Well, it's absolutely an employment crisis. You have COVID-19, which is just shaking everything about us. Our entire labor community is shaken to the core. And one thing I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Black business in particular. It is being said that 40% of Black-owned businesses won't recover from COVID-19. That's going to be just such a tremendous impact on our community. Just imagine all of the folks that we know, all of the Mr. Felix barbershops, all of the the mom and pop grocery stores. You look at Palazzolo that held up East Side for so long. You look at all these all these places. It's those kinds of places right now that are closing all across this country. And so not only are we looking at workers who are suffering from employment, not having employment opportunities, not being able to get re-employment, but you're talking about folks who are entrepreneurs who went in and decided to be brave enough to hang their own shingle, who won't be able to benefit. And so what does Joe Biden plan for being able to build back better? And that wording is very, while it's alliteration, it's also very purposeful, is that this current administration has taken us back to the dark ages in so many ways. And so we have to not only, try to be better, but we have to build it back before we can even do that. So it's one thing to say we're going to look into the future and we're going to do this and that, but we've got to get back to square one from an economic standpoint. And so Joe Biden released a plan that has pillars around manufacturing, pillars around the caregiving economy, pillars around racial equity, and pillars around the environment, and making sure that in all of those sectors there's an infusion of resources, an infusion of capital across those particular pillars, so that we can come back better. Because if we don't, we're going to look to continue to slide in this country and then in our position in the world. And so across those four areas, whether it's making sure that government contracts are available for minority employers, or whether it's having actual infrastructure projects that go up as a part of the manufacturing plan, or participating in a green economy. So building out things that will make our community better, whether it's wind energy or solar panels and solar farms, understanding that it's going to take a huge effort. I mean, I'm talking about FDR levels of a New Deal type of levels. I'm talking about Lyndon Johnson Great Society levels of investment in our communities, and Joe Biden is prepared to do that.
And I think that's a great segue into what Dr. Tarver asked, and I appreciate that question and your response, Mr. Baker. What I've been in my research for this particular production is we're watching African Americans, the employment rate for everybody, blacks, white, greens, blue, everybody. It's the unemployment spike, job losses were tremendous. This goes without saying. But some of these recent studies are showing that African Americans are being reemployed at a much slower rate. And I know that the Build Back Better program talks about racial equity inside of the Build Back Better. My question, it's kind of centered on this study that I was researching. I think I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, but this Economic Policy Institute, it talks about in multiple prongs, but the spiking unemployment rate, it talks about how this unemployment rate, it was much higher for blacks. All workers, the all white workers was 3.1%. Then it was it went to 14.2. All black workers was 5.8, and then it went up to 16.7%. But then as it came back to reemployment, we had black health issues that were being, targeted, which was much higher when it came to the pandemic and suffering from the coronavirus, because African Americans seem to be working in those certain industries, the logistics industry, the warehousing, public transit, social services. We were being impacted. The postal service, all of these services where these black workers were on the front lines, we were getting a worse impact as it came to the employment. The final part of it, it says out of all the numbers, black women suffered the absolute worst as it became unemployment and the disproportionate reemployment issues that are happening. What are specific issues that you guys are doing to strengthen and employment from not just African Americans, but all Americans? And what are some of the commitment to the counter? What I find most disturbing in this worst time is that this current administration is saying that it's going to do away with what it refers to as anti-American training. These policy initiatives and training about diversity, training about affirmative action, training about this current president says it's anti-American. What are some of the inclusive things that you all plan to do as we move forward in your tenure as leading this country?
Well, I mean, the best way to answer that is, Joe Biden not going to do that bullshit that Trump's talking about, right? Like that's the best way to answer. I mean, whether it's the anti-American sentiment, he went on this whole thing about 1776 program versus the 1619 project, and I think that's going to be the first thing, is that he, meaning Joe Biden, is not going to participate in this kind of racial angst politics that Donald Trump is. And so I'll just leave it at that on that piece, is that as a part of that Build Back Better plan, the pillar around racial equity, Joe Biden is going to take a look at every federal agency, and as a threshold question, make sure that there is leadership that is diverse within each agency, because you absolutely have to have that. You have to have people who understand black farmers working in USDA. You absolutely have to have people who are in leadership positions in SBA to be able to help black-owned businesses or Latino-owned businesses when they're in trouble. So I'll just leave that one at that, is that there will be a threshold question across the board, that not only will Joe Biden's staff and everybody look like America, but the federal government is going to look like America and be reflective of what America has to offer, rather than being repressive of all of those things that really are a part of America. Like they forgot about the melting pot. They just said, "Nah, we don't deal with the melting pot anymore. We just we're gonna be homogeneous, and we just gonna we don't want that diversity anymore." And so I think looking at those ideals and trying to get closer to those American aims that we say we love and we hold so dear. To the first part of your question, just about jobs programs, the first difference that you will see is that Joe Biden will have a jobs program, unlike this administration, who doesn't have any program. He's time and time again said, one, he doesn't have a plan for the second administration. You saw the Republican Party went out, and at their convention, they didn't even adopt a platform. They just said they support whatever Donald Trump supports. And so the first thing is that there's no plan on the other side. But Joe Biden will have a plan around, as I said before, around manufacturing, around the economy, or around the environment, around racial equity. and be able to plug people into that system. One thing that's so big in the racial equity component of it is $150 billion will be invested in CDFI banks, black-owned banks, places like that. And that's what's key for all Americans, but particularly for Black Americans, is access to capital. And so making it possible for people to be able to keep their businesses going, and at the same time going back and hiring people to be able to structure other people to provide for their families. You know, we had that one round of the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, that didn't make its way to the businesses that needed it most, small businesses. It didn't make its way to Black-owned businesses. It didn't make its way to businesses of color. You had businesses that just snuck in, had 499 employees, were worth millions and millions of dollars, who got to participate in this program. Meanwhile, you got barbers and beauticians across the country who can't catch a break. So I think one of the first things we'll see from Joe Biden is that he'll fix that program, as well as many of the programs related to the recovery that he can. But that's going to be about giving people access to the capital that they'll need to come back. There's no magic wand. There's no everything's just going to get better. These businesses are either going to live or die off the fact that they have capital or not, because that's going to be the key. And if they don't have capital, they won't be able to hire employees, and we'll go into a deeper and deeper recession.
And I appreciate that. For a final question, I would ask: Does the campaign Partisans Build Back Better have are discussing what is it going to look like when we all come back? Hopefully, when we all come back and we're starting to get jobs, are we going to be able to employ people at a much better wage? This minimum wage has, I mean, this is horrible, Trey. No one can afford to live off of this. And so what are you all planning to do as far as a minimum wage? And are workers going to have the chance, the right to organize when we do come back? Or you guys have some policy in place for that?
Well, Joe Biden is the labor candidate for sure, and has been endorsed by over, I think at this point, over 50 labor unions. But again, shout out to Erica Dinkle-Smith, who's our labor director, and who would probably cuss me out if I got that number wrong. So that's the first thing. Also, Joe Biden will support the $15 minimum wage. He believes that people need a livable wage. He often tells the story about his father telling him that the job is just not about making money, but the job is about dignity and being able to provide for your family. And that's how he sees it. He sees a job as something more than that. Hey, with him growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then Wilmington, Delaware, after his father was fired and couldn't find employment, he understands at a very personal level what that's like to come from a home that's suffering from underemployment. And so he's going to do everything in his power to do so and make sure that people have opportunities. So he wants to be able to create as many jobs as possible across the economy. But the first thing we're going to have to do is stop the bleeding. And part of that bleeding is COVID-19. People act like it's over. People act like, we can go on with our lives. But until we stop the bleeding that resulted from COVID-19, we won't be able to get back on track with anything. And joblessness will continue to go down, and our economy will continue to be broken. And I hate to sound like a broken record on that, but that's just the absolute truth. We can't do anything until we get a hold of this pandemic, have a plan for coming back, around creating capital for people to, whether it's businesses or individuals, be able to support themselves.
And I appreciate that. I know we're running out of time for this episode, but I do want to remind our listeners that you are informing us that the Biden-Harris campaign has a plan. First off, a plan, and it's predicated on first stopping the bleeding with the public health crisis that is COVID-19, limiting that, stopping that. and allowing us to proceed with a deliberate strategic jobs plan that includes raising that minimum wage, a livable wage. So we really appreciate that. I think these are sustainable employment related issues. We know there's so many more things that we want to discuss. So the next time we bring you on, we had the pleasure of discussing with you empowerment and employment. The next two things we want to talk about is the big level economic issue and what this 2020 election is all about. Dr. Tarver, do you have any closing words before we end this episode? And then we'll bring Mr. Baker back on very soon so we can discuss more of this.
Just want to remind people that there are a lot of on Vice President Biden's website, a lot of these agendas that we're discussing have more information. So maybe this will be a good time to kind of plug that piece as well for our viewers so they'll know where to go look for more information.
Yeah, and that's joebiden.com. That's joebiden.com. And definitely you can donate on the beginning of it, I believe there, Trey. And then past that, you could see all of these Build Back Better initiatives. And this has been another episode of In Our Own Defense podcast, where we've been discussing empowerment, employment, economics in the 2020 election with attorney Trey Baker. He's the director of African American engagement for the Biden-Harris 2020 campaign. This is In Our Own Defense, where you host attorney A.D. Winters and Dr. Dolores Tarver. For more information, just find us on all our social media. Our YouTube page, go ahead and like it, subscribe to it. That's In Our Own Defense, or our Facebook and Instagram page at In Our Own Defense, or email us at inourown.defense@gmail.com. We'll be back with more episodes in the future with attorney Trey Baker. So thank you for Dr. Tarver and myself. Have a great day.